The machines had been beeping for 3 days straight when MOM finally squeezed my hand. Her eyes, clouded with morphine and exhaustion, found mine across the sterile hospital room. "David," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the ventilator's rhythmic hiss. "Promise me something." I leaned closer, catching the faint scent of her lavender perfume beneath the antiseptic smell. "Anything, MOM? What is it?" Her grip tightened with surprising strength. "Don't let her speak at my funeral. Promise me." I knew exactly who she meant. Aunt Rebecca, Mom's younger sister. The one who'd shown up to every family gathering with a new story about her latest adventure, her latest triumph, her latest reason why she deserved center stage. The sister who'd borrowed money and never paid it back, who'd missed my graduation to go on a wine tour in Tuscany, who'd somehow made every conversation about herself. "I promise," I said, though something in Mom's eyes suggested there was more to this request than just old sibling rivalry. She died that night, peacefully, while I dozed in the uncomfortable chair beside her bed. The nurse said she'd passed sometime around AM, but I felt it happen that moment when the room suddenly felt too big, too empty, like all the air had been sucked out through an invisible hole. 3 days later, I stood in the funeral home's main chapel, watching the steady stream of mourners file past Mom's casket. She looked smaller than I remembered, but peaceful, wearing the blue dress she'd chosen herself months ago when she'd first started planning for this day. Rebecca arrived fashionably late, as always. She swept through the door in a dramatic black coat that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown timer. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her makeup was perfect. "David, honey," she said, wrapping me in a cloud of expensive perfume and fake sympathy. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Eleanor was such a special woman. Thank you for coming," I managed, stepping back from her embrace. She glanced toward the podium where the funeral director was arranging flowers. "I've prepared a few words to share about your mother. I thought I could speak right after the pastor, actually. Rebecca, MOM specifically asked that you not speak today." The words hung in the air between us like smoke. Rebecca's perfectly contoured face went through several expressions: surprise, hurt, and, finally, something that looked almost like relief. "She said that." Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. Her exact words were, "Don't let her speak at my funeral." Rebecca nodded slowly, then looked around the chapel as if seeing it for the first time. "I see. Well, I suppose that's probably for the best." Something in her tone made me study her face more carefully. There was no anger there, no indignation, just a quiet sadness that seemed to reach much deeper than grief over a funeral speech. The service itself was beautiful. Pastor Mitchell spoke about Mom's 30 years of teaching, her volunteer work at the animal shelter, her legendary chocolate chip cookies that had funded more school fundraisers than anyone could count. My cousin James shared a story about how MOM had taught him to ride a bike when his own parents were too busy with their divorce. Mrs. Henderson from next door talked about Mom's garden and how she'd always shared her tomatoes with anyone who'd take them. But through it all, I kept glancing at Rebecca. She sat in the third row, perfectly composed, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't cry during the eulogies, didn't dab at her eyes with a tissue, didn't do any of the theatrical things I'd expected. She just sat there, listening, like she was hearing stories about a stranger. After the burial, people gathered at Mom's house for the traditional post-funeral meal. I'd hired a catering service, but neighbors and friends had shown up with casseroles and pies anyway. The house felt too full and too empty at the same time, full of people, but empty of the one person who'd made it home. I was in the kitchen, trying to find space in the refrigerator for another potato salad, when Rebecca appeared beside me. "David, when will you be reading the will?" I paused, a Tupperware container halfway to the shelf. "Tomorrow morning." "Why?" I need to know. It's important." There was an urgency in her voice that I'd never heard before. Rebecca had always been the type to assume she'd be taken care of, that things would work out in her favor. This was different. "Mr. Patterson is handling it. 10 o'clock at his office." She nodded, then surprised me by reaching out and squeezing my shoulder. "Thank you, David, for everything. And I'm sorry about the funeral speech." I know she had her reasons. Before I could respond, she was gone, leaving me alone with the leftover food and the strange feeling that I'd just witnessed. Something important, though I couldn't quite put my finger on what. Patterson and Associates occupied the third floor of a downtown building that had seen better decades. The elevator wheezed and groaned as it carried me up past the dentist's office and the tax preparation service. finally depositing me in a hallway that smelled like old coffee and legal documents. Harold Patterson had been Mom's lawyer for 23 years, ever since Dad died and left her to navigate the legal maze of settling an estate. He was a small, methodical man who wore the same style of brown suit every time I'd seen him, and who had the rare ability to make even the most mundane legal procedure sound like a matter of life and death. "David, come in," he said, ushering me through his office door. "My condolences again on your mother's passing. Eleanor was a remarkable woman." His office was exactly what you'd expect from a small-town lawyer while books lined the walls. A wooden desk dominated the center of the room, and the only nod to modern technology was a computer that looked like it might have been cutting edge in 2003. "Will anyone else be joining us?" Patterson asked, settling into his leather chair with a grunt. "I'm not sure." I told Rebecca about the reading, but the door opened, and Rebecca stepped inside. She looked different from the day before, smaller somehow, despite wearing another expensive outfit. Her usual confidence seemed to have evaporated, replaced by something that looked almost like dread. "Rebecca, good to see you," Patterson said, though his tone suggested it was anything but. "Please, have a seat." She took the chair next to mine, her movements careful and precise. I caught a whiff of her perfume different from yesterday, something lighter, less assertive. Patterson opened a manila folder and pulled out a thick document. "As you both know, Eleanor updated her will 6 months ago. She was very specific about her wishes, and she asked me to make sure both of you were present for the reading, both of ours." That was news to me. MOM had never mentioned wanting Rebecca there. "Before I begin," Patterson continued, "I should mention that Eleanor also left me a sealed letter with very specific instructions about when it should be opened. She said I would know the right moment." He held up a cream-colored envelope, my mother's handwriting visible on the front. Even from across the desk, I could see it was addressed to both Rebecca and me. "Now then, let's begin with the will itself." The first part was standard. MOM had left the house to me, along with her car, her furniture, and most of her possessions. There were small bequests to several charities, $1,000 to Mrs. Henderson for taking care of her garden, and $500 to the animal shelter where she volunteered. Then Patterson cleared his throat. "To my sister Rebecca, I leave the contents of safe deposit box 347 at First National Bank, along with the key and all documentation pertaining to said box." I glanced at Rebecca. She'd gone completely still, her hands gripping the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "What's in the safe deposit box?" I asked. Patterson consulted the document. Eleanor didn't specify in the will. She simply noted that Rebecca would understand the significance. "I don't understand," Rebecca said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She said she destroyed everything. She promised me she destroyed everything." "Destroyed what?" I asked, but Rebecca was already reaching for the envelope in Patterson's hand. "The letter," she said. "Please, I need to read the letter." Patterson looked uncertain. Eleanor's instructions were quite specific. She said to open it only when, and I quote, "the truth becomes necessary for healing." The truth. I looked between them. "What truth?" Rebecca's face was pale, but she straightened in her chair. "Mr. Patterson, I think it's time. Please open the letter." Patterson studied her for a long moment, then carefully slit open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in Mom's careful handwriting. He read it silently, his eyebrows rising higher with each line. "I see," he said finally. "Yes, I believe Eleanor was right. The truth has indeed become necessary." He handed the letter to me. "David, I think you should read this aloud." My hands shook slightly as I unfolded the paper. Mom's handwriting was shaky, but clear. She must have written this during one of her good days, before the cancer had taken too much of her strength. "My dear David and Rebecca," I began, then stopped. The first line had already changed everything. "If you are reading this, then the time has come to finally tell the truth about what happened 34 years ago." The room went silent. Even the ancient radiator seemed to stop its constant hissing. I looked at Rebecca, who had tears streaming down her face, then at Patterson, who was watching us both with professional concern. "Should I continue?" I asked. Rebecca nodded. "Please." "It's time." I cleared my throat and continued reading Mom's letter, each word feeling heavier than the last. "David, your father was not James Mitchell, as you have always believed. Your father was Rebecca's husband, Michael Hartwell. The affair lasted 3 months in the summer of 1989, and you were conceived during that time." The words hit me like a physical blow. I read the sentence again, certain I'd misunderstood. but the meaning remained the same. The room began to spin slightly, and I gripped the edge of Patterson's desk to steady myself. Rebecca discovered the truth when you were 2 years old, I continued, my voice sounding strange and distant. She confronted me, and I confessed everything. I begged her forgiveness, but she had every right to hate me. What I did was unforgivable. I betrayed my sister, destroyed her marriage, and shattered her trust. I looked up at Rebecca, who was crying openly. Now, you knew, I whispered. All this time, you knew. She nodded, unable to speak. But there's more, Patterson said gently. Keep reading, David. I forced myself to continue. Rebecca made a choice that I will never stop admiring her for. Instead of exposing the truth and destroying our family, she chose to protect you. She divorced Michael quietly, moved across the country, and never spoke a word of what had happened to anyone. She sacrificed her relationship with her own nephew with you, David, to preserve your innocence and your sense of family. The letter went on, but I had to stop. The revelation was too much, too overwhelming. I set the paper down on Patterson's desk and stared at it, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. I don't understand, I said finally. If she was protecting me, why did MOM always seem so cold toward Rebecca? Why didn't she want her to speak at the funeral? Rebecca wiped her eyes with a tissue from Patterson's desk. Because she knew I couldn't do it, she said. She knew I couldn't stand up in front of all those people and talk about what a wonderful person she was without telling the whole truth. And she knew the truth would destroy you. But why now? I asked. Why tell me now? Patterson picked up the letter and found the relevant passage. She explains that here. David, I am telling you this now because I can no longer bear the weight of this secret. Rebecca has carried this burden alone for 32 years, and it has cost her more than you can imagine. She has been painted as the selfish, irresponsible sister, when in truth, she is the most selfless person I have ever known. I thought about all the family gatherings over the years, all the times I'd rolled my eyes at Rebecca's stories, all the times I'd wondered why she never seemed to settle down, why she never had children of her own, why she always seemed to be running from something. The safe deposit box, I said suddenly. What's in it? Rebecca looked at Patterson, who nodded. Letters, she said. Letters from Michael, from your real father. He wrote to me for years after the divorce, trying to explain, trying to apologize. And there are letters from me, letters I wrote to you, but never sent. Birthday cards, Christmas cards, graduation congratulations. Everything I wanted to say but couldn't. The room was quiet except for the ticking of Patterson's old clock. I stared at the letter, at my mother's handwriting, at the truth that had been hidden for more than 3 decades. There's one more thing, Patterson said. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small key. Eleanor left this for you, Rebecca, along with instructions to take David to the safe deposit box whenever he was ready. Rebecca took the key with trembling hands. I understand if you need time, she said to me. I understand if you never want to see me again. I've been living with this secret for so long, I had almost convinced myself it was better this way. I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. The expensive clothes, the elaborate stories, the constant travel. Suddenly, it all made sense. She'd been running from the truth, building a life that looked glamorous from the outside, but was really just a way to avoid dealing with the pain of losing her family. You never said anything, I said. All these years, you let me think you were the irresponsible one. You let me think you didn't care. I cared. Too much, she whispered. That was the problem. I loved you so much, and I loved Eleanor so much, and I couldn't bear to be the one who destroyed everything. So I removed myself from the equation. I stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked the busy street below. Normal people were going about their normal lives, completely unaware that my entire world had just been turned upside down. My father, I said, not turning around. Michael, is he still alive? Yes, Rebecca said quietly. He lives in Portland now. He remarried, has 2 other children. He's never stopped asking about you. And you never told him. I couldn't risk it. What if he tried to contact you? What if he told his new family? The secret would have come out eventually. And Eleanor was so determined to protect you from the truth. I turned around to face them both. So what happens now? What am I supposed to do with this information? Patterson cleared his throat. If I may, he said. Eleanor left one final instruction. She wanted me to tell you that the choice is entirely yours. You can choose to explore this new truth, or you can choose to let it remain buried. She said that either decision would be the right one, as long as it was your decision to make. Rebecca stood up, clutching her purse. I should go, she said. I should let you process this. No, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. No, you shouldn't go. We need to talk. We need to. I don't know what we need to do, but we need to do it together. She looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, hope mixed with fear, love mixed with guilt. Are you sure? She asked. I thought about the letter, about the years of misunderstanding, about the aunt who had sacrificed everything to protect a secret that was never really hers to keep. I'm sure, I said. But first, I think we need to visit that safe deposit box. First National Bank was a 15-minute drive from Patterson's office, but it felt like an hour. Rebecca sat in the passenger seat of my car, staring out the window at the familiar streets of our hometown. Neither of us spoke during the drive. What was there to say? 3 decades of family history had just been rewritten in the span of 20 minutes. The bank was busy with the usual Friday afternoon crowd, people cashing paychecks, making deposits, standing in line to complain about fees. We waited our turn at the customer service desk. 2 people who looked like they belonged together, but felt like strangers. Can I help you? The clerk was young, probably fresh out of college, with the kind of enthusiasm that suggested she hadn't yet learned to hate her job. Rebecca slid the key across the counter. We need to access safe deposit box 347. The clerk checked her computer, then looked at us with slight confusion. The box is registered to Eleanor Mitchell. Are you authorized users? She passed away earlier this week, I said, producing the death certificate and the paperwork Patterson had given us. We're here as beneficiaries. It took another 10 minutes to verify our identities and get the proper forms signed. The clerk led us through a heavy door into the vault, past rows of gleaming metal boxes, each one containing someone's most precious secrets. Box 347 was near the bottom, requiring both the bank's key and Rebecca's key to open. Inside was a single manila envelope, thick with contents. Would you like to use one of our private rooms? The clerk asked. Please, Rebecca said. The private room was small and windowless, furnished with just a table and 2 chairs. Rebecca set the envelope on the table between us and stared at it as if it might explode. I haven't seen these in 30 years, she said. I wasn't even sure Eleanor had kept them. Why did she keep them? I don't know. Maybe she thought someday. Maybe she thought there would come a time when you'd need to know the truth. I reached for the envelope, then stopped. Are you ready for this? Rebecca nodded. I've been ready for 34 years. The envelope contained dozens of letters, separated into 2 stacks by a rubber band. The first stack was written in a masculine handwriting I didn't recognize. The second stack was in Rebecca's careful script, each envelope addressed to David Mitchell, but never sent. I picked up the first letter from the unknown writer. The return address read Michael Hartwell, and it was postmarked just 3 months after Rebecca's divorce. Rebecca, I read aloud. I know you don't want to hear from me, but I can't stop thinking about what happened. I can't stop thinking about the boy, about David. I know I have no right to ask, but please tell me he's okay. Please tell me he's happy. I looked up at Rebecca, who was crying again. He wrote to you about me. Every year, she said. Your birthday, Christmas, sometimes just random days when he was thinking about you. I never responded, but I kept every letter I picked up. Another one. This one dated 5 years later. Rebecca, David would be 7 now. Does he like baseball? I've been coaching Little League, and I can't help wondering if he's playing sports. I dream about him sometimes. I dream about teaching him to throw a curveball. The letters continued chronologically, marking the passage of years through a father's desperate desire to know his son. High school graduation, college acceptance, career milestones Michael could only guess at. Each letter was a small window into a man's regret and love. He never stopped caring, I said. He never stopped hoping. Rebecca corrected. There's a difference. I set Michael's letters aside and picked up the first of Rebecca's. This one was dated just a few months after I'd started kindergarten. My dear David, I read. Today was your first day of school. I saw you walking to the bus stop from my hotel window. I was in town for a conference, and I couldn't resist driving by the house. You looked so grown up, in your little backpack, so confident. I wanted to run out and hug you, to tell you how proud I am of you. But I knew I couldn't. I knew it would only complicate things. Letter after letter revealed the depth of Rebecca's sacrifice. She'd watched my life from a distance, celebrating my achievements in silence, mourning my failures alone. She'd attended my high school graduation, sitting in the back row where MOM wouldn't see her. She'd driven past my college campus during freshman orientation, just to see where I'd be living. She'd even flown back from Paris to be nearby when I'd had my appendix out at age 22, though she never came to the hospital. You were always there, I said, setting down a letter about my college graduation. You were always watching out for me, and I never knew. I couldn't stay away completely, she admitted. I tried, but I couldn't. You were my nephew, and I loved you. I just couldn't figure out how to be part of your life without destroying it. Near the bottom of the stack was a letter dated just 2 years ago. It was different from the others, shorter, more direct. David, I read, your MOM is sick. I know you don't want to hear from me, but I thought you should know that I'm proud of how you're taking care of her. I've been watching from afar, as always, and I can see what a good man you've become. I take no credit for that. That's all Eleanor's doing, and yours. But I wanted you to know that your real father is proud of you too, even if you'll never know his name. I set the letter down and looked at Rebecca. She knew. MOM knew you were still watching. She called me when she got the diagnosis, Rebecca said. It was the first time we'd spoken in 15 years. She asked me to come home, to be there for you after she was gone. I told her I couldn't, that it would be too complicated, too painful. She said she understood. But you came anyway. To the funeral, I had to. She was my sister, and despite everything, I loved her, and I needed to see you, to make sure you were going to be okay. I thought about the funeral, about how Rebecca had sat so quietly in the third row, how she hadn't tried to speak or draw attention to herself, how she'd seemed to be listening to stories about a stranger. The stories, I said suddenly. During the funeral, you were hearing about the mother I knew, the one who raised me. But that wasn't the Eleanor you remembered. Rebecca nodded. The Eleanor I remembered was my big sister, who stole my husband and then spent 30 years being the perfect mother to the child that should have been mine. It was complicated. Did you hate her? Rebecca was quiet for a long time. I tried to, she said finally. For a while, I tried to hate her. But hate is exhausting, and it doesn't change anything. She made a terrible mistake, but she spent the rest of her life trying to make up for it. She was a good mother to you, David. She gave you everything she couldn't give me. I leaned back in my chair, overwhelmed by the weight of all these revelations. What am I supposed to do with all this? How am I supposed to process 34 years of lies? They weren't lies, Rebecca said gently. They were protections. There's a difference. Is there? My whole life, I thought my father was James Mitchell, the man who died when I was 2. I thought you were the irresponsible aunt who couldn't be bothered to stay in touch. I thought MOM was the perfect single mother who sacrificed everything for me. She did sacrifice everything for you. That part was true. I picked up the last letter in the stack. It was addressed to me in Rebecca's handwriting, but it was dated just 3 weeks ago, right around the time MOM had extracted that promise from me about the funeral. David, I read, if you're reading this, then Eleanor is gone, and the truth has finally come out. I want you to know that I don't expect anything from you. I don't expect forgiveness or understanding or a relationship. I just want you to know that loving you from a distance has been both the hardest and the most important thing I've ever done. You are the best part of a very complicated situation, and I have never regretted protecting you, even when it cost me everything else. I set the letter down and looked at Rebecca. When did you write this? 3 weeks ago. Eleanor called me and said she was going to tell you the truth. She asked me to write one final letter, something you could read. After she was gone, I thought about it for days before I could bring myself to do it, and you gave it to her. I mailed it to Patterson's office with instructions to put it in the safe deposit box. I knew she was planning to leave me the key in her will. She told me that much. The room was silent, except for the hum of the bank's ventilation system. I stared at the letters spread across the table, 34 years of love and loss and sacrifice, all hidden away in a metal box. I need to think, I said finally. I need to process all of this, Rebecca nodded. Of course, this is a lot, but I don't want you to leave town. Not yet. I need time to figure out what I'm feeling, but I don't want you to disappear again. I'm staying at the Marriott downtown, she said. I'll be there as long as you need me to be. We gathered up the letters and put them back in the envelope. As we prepared to leave the bank, Rebecca touched my arm. David, she said, I want you to know something. Every story I ever told at family gatherings, every adventure I've bragged about, every exotic place I've visited, I was always wishing you were there with me. I was always wishing I could share those experiences with my nephew. Why didn't you ever invite me? Because I was afraid you'd say no, and I was afraid you'd say yes. I spent the weekend alone in Mom's house, surrounded by the letters and the weight of everything I'd learned. I'd called in sick to work on Monday, something I'd never done in 7 years at the accounting firm. My boss, Mr. Peterson, had been understanding he'd known MOM was sick, and he assumed I needed time to grieve. If only he knew I was grieving the loss of my entire identity. I'd read through every letter at least 3 times. Michael's letters painted a picture of a man consumed by regret and longing. Rebecca's letters revealed a woman who'd chosen sacrifice over selfishness, who'd watched her nephew grow up from the shadows while pretending not to care. But it was the final letter that kept drawing me back to the one MOM had written to both of us. I'd only read the first few paragraphs aloud in Patterson's office, but the full letter was 3 pages long, and each page contained revelations that reshaped everything I thought I knew about my family. David, the letter continued, I know this news will be devastating to you. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the lie. Sorry for the deception. Sorry for putting you in a position where you have to choose between the father you thought you knew and the father you actually have. But I need you to understand that every decision I made was made out of love for you. She went on to explain the affair in clinical detail, how it had started as comfort during a difficult time in her marriage, how it had evolved into something more, how it had ended when she realized she was pregnant and couldn't be sure who the father was until after I was born. The timing made it clear, she wrote. James had been traveling for work during the weeks when you were conceived. There was no doubt that Michael was your father, but by then, Rebecca had already confronted me and demanded the truth. She could have destroyed everything our family, your innocence, your sense of security. Instead, she chose to protect you. The letter explained how Rebecca had agreed to a quiet divorce, how she'd moved to California to put distance between herself and the situation, how she'd built a life that looked successful from the outside but was really just a way to cope with the loss of her family. She visits more often than you realize, MOM wrote. She's been to every major milestone in your life, always from a distance, always careful not to interfere. She was at your high school graduation, your college graduation, even your first day at the accounting firm. She's been the aunt you never knew you needed, and she's been the mother I could never be to her. That last line had stopped me cold. The mother I could never be to her. I'd read it a dozen times, trying to understand what MOM meant, until finally it clicked. Rebecca had never had children of her own. She'd sacrificed her chance at motherhood to protect mine. By Tuesday morning, I knew I had to make a decision. I could continue living with the truth as a burden, or I could figure out how to make it into something else, something that might actually bring healing instead of just pain. I picked up my phone and dialed the Marriott. Rebecca, Hartwell's room, please. One moment. The phone rang 3 times before she answered. Hello, it's David. Can we talk? Of course. Do you want me to come to the house? No, I want to meet somewhere neutral. How about the diner on Main Street? The one with the terrible coffee. I could hear the smile in her voice. Mel's Diner. I remember. Your MOM used to take you there for pancakes on Saturday mornings. You remember that? I remember everything, David. That's been the problem. An hour later, I was sitting in a red vinyl booth at Mel's Diner, stirring sugar into coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since the Carter administration. Rebecca arrived exactly on time, wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of her usual designer outfits. She looked more like the aunt I remembered from childhood, before the distance, before the secrets, before everything went wrong. Thank you for calling, she said, sliding into the booth across from me. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure I would either, I admitted. But I keep thinking about something MOM wrote in her letter. She said you'd been the aunt I never knew I needed. I want to understand what that means. Rebecca ordered coffee and sat quietly while I gathered my thoughts. The diner was mostly empty, just us. An elderly man reading the newspaper, and a young mother trying to convince her toddler to eat his eggs. Tell me about the graduations, I said finally. Tell me about being there. Rebecca's eyes lit. Oh, high school graduation was the hardest. I sat in the very back row, and I cried when they called your name. You looked so grown up in your cap and gown, so confident. I wanted to run down and hug you, to tell everyone that I was your aunt and I was proud of you. Why didn't you? Because it wasn't my place. I'd given up that right when I agreed to keep the secret. I was just a ghost in your life, David. Present but invisible. College graduation. Easier. Because there were so many people I could blend in. I actually sat closer that time, maybe 10 rows back. You stumbled a little when you walked across the stage. and I held my breath until you recovered. Afterward, I watched you with Eleanor, saw how happy she was, how proud. I knew I'd made the right choice. And my first day at work? Rebecca laughed. That was trickier. I sat in my car across the street from your office building and watched you walk in. You were wearing that blue suit Eleanor had bought you, and you looked terrified. I wanted to call you, to tell you that first days are always scary, but you were going to be fine. Instead, I drove home and wrote you a letter I never sent. Were there other times? Dozens. I was there when you moved into your apartment, when you bought your first car, when you went on your first real date. I was in the emergency room when you had your appendix out. I told them I was a family friend. I sat in the waiting room all night, just in case you needed something. I stared at her across the table. You've been watching my whole life. I have been loving your whole life, she corrected, from a distance, but still loving it. What about your own life, your career, your travels, your relationships? Rebecca was quiet for a long time. I built a life that looked good from the outside, she said finally. I traveled because I was running from home. I changed jobs frequently because I couldn't get too attached to any one place. I never married because I was already committed to something else, to protecting you, to carrying this secret, to making sure the truth never came out. That's not living, Rebecca. That's just surviving. I know. But it was the choice I made, and I don't regret it. You grew up happy and secure, with a mother who loved you, and a sense of family that was real, even if it was built on a lie. That was worth everything I gave up. I took a sip of the terrible coffee and tried to process what she was telling me. Michael, my father, what's he like? He's a good man who made a terrible mistake. He was going through a difficult time in his marriage, and Eleanor was there, and things happened that shouldn't have happened. But he's never stopped loving you, David. He's never stopped hoping that someday he might get to know you. Does he know about this? About the will? About the truth coming out? I called him yesterday. He was shocked. He'd given up hope years ago that you'd ever know the truth. He said he'd always dreamed of having a conversation with you, but he never imagined it would actually happen. I leaned back in the booth, overwhelmed. I don't know if I'm ready to talk to him. You don't have to be ready. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. But David, if you ever want to explore the relationship, he's waiting. He's been waiting for 34 years. The weight of that statement settled between us. 34 years of waiting. 34 years of wondering. 34 years of a father loving a son he'd never been allowed to know. I need his number, I said suddenly. Rebecca looked surprised. Are you sure? No, I'm not sure about anything, but I think I need to hear his voice. I think I need to know what he sounds like. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small address book, the old-fashioned kind that people used to carry before smartphones. She flipped through the pages and wrote a number on a napkin. His name is Michael Hartwell. He lives in Portland, works as a civil engineer. He's remarried. Her name is Susan, and they have 2 children together. Emma is 16, and Jake is 14. I stared at the napkin. I have half-siblings. You have half-siblings who don't know you exist. Michael never told Susan about the affair or about you. It's been his secret to carry, just like it's been mine. So if I call him, you'll be opening a door that's been closed for 3 decades. For both of you. I folded the napkin and put it in my wallet. I'm not going to call him today. Maybe not this week. But I want to have the option. That's all anyone can ask for. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the diner, the sizzle of bacon on the grill, the clink of silverware, the quiet conversations of other customers living their normal, uncomplicated lives. Rebecca, I said finally, I want you to know something. I don't blame you for what happened. I don't blame you for the affair, for the secret, for any of it. If anything, I'm grateful. You sacrificed your relationship with me to protect me. You gave up your chance to be the aunt you wanted to be so that I could have the mother I needed. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's something to be honored. Tears were streaming down her face again. I've waited 34 years to hear someone say that. Well, now you have. And I want you to know something else. I want you to be part of my life. Not as the aunt who watches from the shadows, but as the aunt who belongs at family dinners and birthday parties and all the regular, boring stuff that makes up a real relationship. David, I don't know if I know how to do that anymore. I've been on the outside for so long. Then we'll figure it out together. We'll be awkward and uncomfortable, and we'll probably make mistakes. But we'll figure it out. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'd like that very much. Good, because I'm going to need help going through most things. and I'm going to need someone to explain all those stories you used to tell at family gatherings. I want to know which ones were true and which ones were just ways to avoid talking about what you were really doing. Rebecca laughed. Most of them were true, actually. I really did go to all those places and have all those adventures. I just never mentioned that I was thinking about you the whole time, wishing you were there with me. Well, maybe next time. You can invite me along. I'd like that, she said. I'd like that very much. 3 days later, I was sitting in Mom's kitchen with Michael Hartwell's phone number spread out on the table in front of me like a puzzle I couldn't solve. I picked up the phone a dozen times, dialed half the number, then hung up. What was I supposed to say? Hi, you don't know me, but I'm the son you never got to raise. Rebecca had called twice to check on me, but she wasn't pushing. She seemed to understand that this was something I had to do in my own time, in my own way. Finally, around 7 o'clock on Thursday evening, I dialed the full number before I could lose my nerve again. Hello? The voice was deep, warm, with just a hint of a northwestern accent. Is this Michael Hartwell? Yes, this is Michael. Who's calling? I took a breath. My name is David Mitchell. I think you might be my father. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. David, his voice was barely a whisper. David, is that really you? Yes, it's really me. Oh my God. Oh my God. I can't believe. Rebecca said she'd given you my number, but I didn't dare hope. David, I've been waiting for this call for 34 years. I know. I'm sorry it took so long. No, don't apologize. Don't ever apologize. You have nothing to apologize for. How are you? Are you okay? Are you married? Do you have children? I have so many questions, I don't know where to start. His enthusiasm was infectious, and despite my nervousness, I found myself smiling. I'm okay. I'm not married, no children. I work as an accountant here in town, the same town where I grew up. An accountant. That's wonderful. Are you good with numbers? I always wondered if you'd inherited my brain for math and engineering. I suppose I am. I never thought about where that came from. What else? Tell me everything. What do you look like? What are your hobbies? What kind of music do you like? I laughed. Slow down. We have time for all of this, do we? I mean, I hope we do. But I don't want to assume anything. I don't want to presume that you're interested in having a relationship with me just because you called. I'm not sure what I want yet, I said honestly. This is all very new and very overwhelming, but I wanted to hear your voice. I wanted to know what you sounded like. I understand. This has to be incredibly difficult for you. Learning that your entire life story isn't what you thought it was. I can't imagine how that feels. It's strange, I admitted. Part of me is angry about the lies, but part of me understands why they were necessary. And part of me is curious about you, about what my life might have been like if things had been different. I think about that every day, Michael said quietly. I think about what it would have been like to teach you to ride a bike, to help you with your homework, to be there for your first day of school. I think about all the moments I missed, all the conversations we never had. Tell me about your other children, Emma and Jake. They're wonderful kids. Emma's a junior in high school, very academic, wants to study PI Med. Jake's a freshman, more athletic, he plays soccer and baseball. They're both good kids, smart and funny and kind. Do they know about me? Michael was quiet for a moment. No, they don't. Susan doesn't know either. The affair, your existence, it's been my secret to carry. I didn't think it was fair to burden them with something that couldn't be changed. But now it can be changed. Maybe. If you want it to be changed, if you're interested in being part of our family. The word family hit me harder than I'd expected. For 34 years, my family had been just MOM and me, with Rebecca as the distant, eccentric aunt who drifted in and out of our lives. Now I was being offered the chance to belong to something bigger, more complex. I don't know if I'm ready for that, I said. Meeting your wife and kids, explaining who I am and how I fit into the picture. That's a lot, of course it is. We can take this as slowly as you need to. Maybe we could start by just talking, getting to know each other. Maybe we could meet for coffee sometime, if you're ever in Portland. Or you could come here, I said, surprising myself with the offer. I'm going through Mom's things, settling her estate. Rebecca's helping me. Maybe you could come, visit. You'd want that. I think I would. I think I'd like to meet you in person, to see if we look alike, to see if there's anything of you in me besides the math skills. David, I would love nothing more than to meet you. When would be good? Next weekend. Saturday afternoon. I'll be there. Just tell me where and when. We spent another hour on the phone, exchanging basic information about our lives, our interests, our hopes. Michael told me about his work as a civil engineer, his love of hiking and photography, his struggle with the guilt he'd carried for 34 years. I told him about growing up with MOM, about my job, about the shock of learning the truth about my parentage. By the time we hung up, I felt like I'd been talking to a familiar stranger, someone whose voice I recognized even though I'd never heard it before. Someone whose mannerisms seemed oddly familiar, even though we'd never met. That night, I called Rebecca. How did it go? She asked immediately. Better than I expected. He's coming to visit next weekend. Here, to town. Yes. I invited him to come see Mom's house, to meet me properly. I thought you might want to be there too. David, I'm not sure that's a good idea. Michael and I haven't spoken face to face since the divorce. There's so much history, so much pain, all the more reason to deal with it now. The three of us are the only people who know the whole truth. Maybe it's time we stopped carrying these secrets separately and started carrying them together. Rebecca was quiet for a long time. It won't be easy. Nothing about this has been easy, but maybe it doesn't have to be impossible either. All right, she said finally. I'll be there. We'll face this together. After I hung up, I sat in Mom's living room, looking at the family photos on the mantel. Pictures of MOM and me at various ages. Pictures of holidays and birthdays and ordinary moments that had seemed so complete at the time. Now they looked different, not false. Exactly, but incomplete. Like puzzle pieces that belonged to a larger picture I was only now beginning to see. I thought about Michael's voice, about the eagerness and hope I'd heard there. I thought about Rebecca's sacrifice, about the 34 years she'd spent loving me from a distance. I thought about Mom's final confession, about her determination to protect me even as she revealed the truth. And for the first time since Patterson had opened that letter, I felt something other than confusion and pain. I felt possibility, the possibility that the truth, even when it's complicated and messy and painful, might actually set us all free. Saturday morning dawned grey and drizzly, the kind of weather that made everything look uncertain and temporary. I'd been up since 5, cleaning the house for the 3rd time, rearranging furniture, and generally driving myself crazy with nervous energy. Rebecca arrived at 10, carrying coffee and pastries from the bakery. Downtown, she looked as nervous as I felt, dressed carefully in slacks and a sweater that managed to be both elegant and understated. How are you holding up? She asked, setting the food on the kitchen counter. I've reorganized Mom's spice rack twice this morning, I said. I think that tells you everything you need to know about my mental state. It's going to be fine, David. Awkward, probably, but fine. When was the last time you saw him? Michael, I mean, the day I signed the divorce papers, March 15th, 1991. We sat in my lawyer's office for 45 minutes and didn't speak to each other once. He looked miserable, and I felt like my world was ending. And now? Now I feel like maybe it's beginning again. Michael's rental car pulled into the driveway at exactly 2 o'clock. Through the living room window, I watched him sit in the driver's seat for a moment, apparently gathering his courage. He was a tall man, probably 6'2", with dark hair going grey at the temples and the kind of face that suggested he spent time outdoors. When he finally got out of the car, his movements were careful, deliberate, like someone approaching a place that might be holy or dangerous, or both. I opened the front door before he could knock. Michael, David, we stood there for a moment, taking each other in. I could see myself in his features, the shape of his eyes, the line of his jaw, the way he held his shoulders. It was like looking into a funhouse mirror that showed me what I might look like in 25 years. You look like your mother, he said finally. Everyone always said that, but you have my hands and my stubborn chin. I touched my chin self-consciously. Is that what this is? That's exactly what that is. I used to drive my own mother crazy with that chin. Rebecca appeared behind me, and Michael's expression changed completely. The easy familiarity he'd been building with me evaporated, replaced by something more complicated: regret, longing, and 34 years of unfinished business. Hello, Rebecca. Hello, Michael. They looked at each other across the doorway. Two people who had once been married, who had once loved each other, who had once destroyed each other. You look well, he said. So do you. Marriage and fatherhood agree with you. Rebecca, not here, she said quickly. Not on the doorstep. Come inside. We have things to discuss, all of us, but let's do it properly. I led them into the living room, where I'd sit out the coffee and pastries Rebecca had brought. We arranged ourselves carefully, Michael on the sofa, Rebecca in the armchair, me in the chair across from both of them. It felt like the setup for either a therapy session or a peace negotiation. This is strange, Michael said, looking around the room. Being in Eleanor's house, seeing her things. I keep expecting her to walk in and tell me to leave. She might have. I said, she wasn't exactly your biggest fan. I don't blame her. I seduced her sister, got her pregnant, and then abandoned both of them to deal with the consequences. I've had 34 years to think about what a coward I was. You didn't abandon us, Rebecca said quietly. I threw you out. There's a difference. You had every right to throw me out. I betrayed our marriage. I betrayed your trust. Yes, you did. But I've had 34 years to think about it too. And I've realized that betrayal isn't always the end of the story. Sometimes it's just the middle. Michael looked at her with surprise. I never expected forgiveness from you. I'm not sure I'm offering forgiveness. I'm just saying that maybe it's time to stop letting the past control the present. I watched this exchange with fascination. These were two people who had once shared a life, who had once loved each other enough to promise forever, who had been torn apart by a moment of weakness that had consequences none of them could have predicted. Tell me about the affair, I said. Suddenly, both of them looked at me in shock. David, Rebecca said, you don't need to. Yes, I do. I need to understand how this happened. I need to understand how three people who supposedly loved each other ended up in this situation. Michael and Rebecca exchanged a look. Are you sure? Michael asked. I'm sure. Michael leaned back on the sofa, his hands clasped in his lap. Your mother and I had been friends for years before anything happened. Rebecca and I were going through a rough patch in our marriage, my fault, mostly. I was working too much, traveling too much, not paying enough attention to what was happening at home. Eleanor was having problems with James. He was drinking heavily, staying out late, sometimes not coming home at all. I didn't know Dad had a drinking problem. It wasn't something Eleanor liked to talk about. She was embarrassed by it, ashamed. She kept hoping he'd get better, that he'd get help, but he never did. So you and Emoem found comfort in each other, I said. It started innocently, Rebecca said. Michael would come over to fix things around the house when James wasn't there to do it. Eleanor would cook dinner for him as a thank you. They'd talk about their problems, offer each other support, and somewhere along the way, support became something else. Michael continued. It wasn't planned. It wasn't premeditated. It just happened. How long did it last? 3 months, Michael said, from July to September 1989. We both knew it was wrong, but we couldn't seem to stop. And then Eleanor found out she was pregnant, and everything changed. She told you immediately. She told me she was pregnant, but she wasn't sure who the father was. James was home occasionally during that time, so there was a possibility. But when you were born, there was no doubt. You looked exactly like me. What did you want to do? Michael was quiet for a long time. I wanted to leave Rebecca and marry Eleanor. I wanted us to be a family, you, me, and Eleanor. I thought I was in love with her. But you weren't. I was in love with the idea of her. I was in love with someone who needed me, who appreciated me, who made me feel like I mattered. But that's not the same thing as really being in love with someone. And Rebecca found out. I told her. Rebecca said, Michael came to me a week after you were born and confessed everything. He said he wanted a divorce so he could marry Eleanor and help raise you. But that's not what happened. No, because Eleanor didn't want him. I looked at Michael, who was staring at his hands. She didn't want you. She said the affair had been a mistake, that she'd been vulnerable and lonely and had made a terrible choice. She said she didn't love me, she just needed someone. And I'd been there. She wanted to work things out with James, to try to make her marriage work. So you lost both of them. I lost everything, Michael said quietly. My wife, my lover, my son. James sobered up long enough to help Eleanor raise you for the first 2 years, and then he died in that car accident. By then, Rebecca had already filed for divorce and moved to California, and I grew up thinking James was my father. Eleanor thought it was better that way. Simpler, less painful for everyone, except for you, I said. And except for Rebecca. We made our choices, Rebecca said. All of us. They weren't perfect choices, but they were the choices we could live with. Could you, though? Could you really live with them? Michael and Rebecca looked at each other again, and I saw something pass between them, not love, exactly, but understanding. The recognition of shared pain, shared loss, shared responsibility. We survived them, Michael said finally. That's about all I can say. I got up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where I'd grown up, where I'd learned to ride a bike and played with neighborhood kids and lived what I thought was a normal life. Everything looked the same, but everything was different. I want to meet them, I said without turning around. Emma and Jake, your other children, my half-siblings. David, Michael said carefully, that would mean telling them about you. It would mean telling Susan about the affair, about everything that happened. It would change their whole understanding of our family. Maybe it's time for that to happen. Maybe it is, he said quietly. Maybe it's time for all the secrets to come out. I turned back to face them. I want us to be a family, not the family we should have been 34 years ago, but the family we can be now. Complicated, messy, unconventional, but real. Rebecca was crying again, but this time they looked like tears of relief rather than grief. I'd like that, she said. I'd like that very much, Michael nodded. So would I. But David, you have to understand this is going to be hard. Susan and the kids are going to have questions. They're going to be hurt and confused. My marriage might not survive this. Then maybe it's not the marriage you thought it was, I said. Maybe it's time to find out what's real and what's just another comfortable lie. When do you want to do this? He asked. Soon. Before I lose my nerve. Before we all change our minds and decide the secrets were easier to carry. Next weekend? Rebecca suggested. I could fly out to Portland with David. We could tell them together. Michael took a deep breath. All right. Next weekend. I'll prepare Susan as much as I can. But David, you have to be ready for the possibility that this won't go well. I'm ready for the possibility that it will go badly, I said. But I'm also ready for the possibility that it might go better than any of us expect. The flight to Portland was my first time on an airplane in 5 years, and my first time flying anywhere with Rebecca. She'd booked us seats together, and during the 2-hour flight, she told me stories about her travels. Real stories this time, not the edited versions she'd shared at family gatherings. The truth is, she said as we circled over the Columbia River, most of my adventures were just ways of avoiding coming home. I'd planned trips whenever I knew there was a family event I couldn't handle, whenever the loneliness got too overwhelming. Like when? Your high school graduation party. I was supposed to fly back from Barcelona that week, but I couldn't face seeing you celebrate with Eleanor while I sat in the corner pretending to be the fun aunt who'd rather be somewhere else. So I extended my trip by 2 weeks and missed it entirely. I missed you at that party, I said. I remember asking MOM where you were. What did she tell you? That you had a work commitment that couldn't be rescheduled. I believed her. We got good at creating believable excuses for my absence. It was easier than admitting the truth that I couldn't bear to watch you living the life I'd helped to protect, but couldn't be part of. Michael had offered to pick us up at the airport, but I'd insisted on renting a car. I needed the option to leave if things went badly. Needed to feel like I had some control over the situation. His house was in a suburban neighborhood that could have been transplanted from any middle-class community in America. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained lawns, the occasional basketball hoop in a driveway. It was the kind of neighborhood where kids rode bikes and parents walked dogs and everyone knew each other's names. The house itself was a 2-story colonial with blue shutters and a red front door. A soccer ball sat in the yard, and I could see children's bikes in the garage. It looked like the home of a happy family, which made what we were about to do feel even more disruptive. Michael answered the door before we could knock. He looked nervous but determined, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt, like he was dressing for a job interview instead of a family revelation. They're in the living room, he said quietly. Susan knows something's happening, but I haven't told her what. The kids think you're just friends from out of town. How do you want to do this? Rebecca asked. I thought I'd introduce you. Let everyone get comfortable, and then, I guess we'll figure it out as we go. The living room was warm and lived in, with family photos covering the mantel and children's artwork hung on the walls. Susan was sitting on the couch with a cup of tea, a woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and graying blonde hair. She stood when we entered, extending her hand with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. You must be David, she said. Michael's told me so much about you. I wondered what exactly Michael had told her, but I shook her hand and smiled back. It's nice to meet you, Susan. This is Rebecca. Emma and Jake were sprawled on the floor, ostensibly doing homework, but clearly more interested in checking out the strangers their father had brought home. Emma was tall and serious looking, with her father's dark hair and intelligent eyes. Jake was smaller, more compact, with a kind of restless energy that suggested he'd rather be outside playing sports than sitting in the living room making small talk. Kids, I want you to meet David and Rebecca, Michael said. They're old friends of mine. From back east. Cool, Jake said without looking up from his math homework. Dad, can I go to Tyler's house after this? Let's see how the afternoon goes, Michael said. Why don't you finish your homework first? We made small talk for a few minutes, Michael asking about our flight, Susan offering coffee, the kids gradually warming up to the presence of strangers. But I could feel the tension in the room, the sense that everyone was waiting for something to happen without knowing what that something might be. Finally, Michael cleared his throat. Actually, there's something I need to tell everyone. Something important. Susan set down her teacup. The kids looked up from their homework. David and Rebecca aren't exactly old friends, Michael continued. They're family. Sort of. What kind of family? Emma asked, her teenager's radar picking up on the undercurrents in the room. Michael looked at me, then at Rebecca, then back at his wife and children. This is going to be difficult to explain, and I want everyone to know that I never intended for things to happen this way. Michael, Susan said quietly, you're scaring me. 34 years ago, before I met your mother, he said to Emma and Jake, I was married to Rebecca. And during that marriage, I made a terrible mistake. I had an affair with Rebecca's sister, Eleanor. And David. David is the son who resulted from that affair. The silence in the room was absolute. Susan's face went through several expressions: confusion, understanding, hurt, and finally something that looked like resignation. Emma's mouth fell open. Jake just stared. You're our half-brother? Emma asked finally. Yes, I said. I just found out myself 2 weeks ago. I grew up thinking someone else was my father. And you, Jake said to Rebecca, you're our... What? Step-aunt. I'm your father's ex-wife, Rebecca said gently. And David's aunt. It's complicated. Susan stood up abruptly. Kids, why don't you go upstairs for a few minutes? The adults need to talk. But Emma started. Upstairs. Now. We'll explain everything later. Emma and Jake gathered their homework and left the room, but I could hear them whispering on the stairs. They weren't going far. Susan turned to face Michael, her arms crossed over her chest. How long have you known about this? I've always known David existed. I've known since the day he was born that he was my son. And you never told me. I didn't see the point. He was being raised by Eleanor. He had a family. He didn't need me complicating his life. That wasn't your decision to make alone, Michael. We've been married for 16 years. We have children together. This affects all of us, I know. I know it does, and I'm sorry. I should have told you years ago. Susan looked at me, then at Rebecca. And you two just decided to show up here and blow up our family? It wasn't like that, I said. My mother died 2 weeks ago. In her will, she revealed the truth about my parentage. I didn't know any of this until then. And what do you want from us now? Money? A relationship? What? Her hostility was understandable, but it still stuck. I want to know my father, I said simply. I want to know my half-siblings. I want to be part of a family that's bigger than just me, even if it destroys the family that already exists. Susan, Michael said, that's not fair, isn't it? We have 2 children who just found out their father has been lying to them their entire lives. We have a marriage that was apparently built on a pretty significant omission. How? Is any of this fair? She was right, of course. We were asking them to absorb 34 years of secrets and lies, to make room in their lives for complications they'd never asked for. You're right, Rebecca said quietly. This isn't fair to any of you. We knew it wouldn't be. But the alternative was continuing to live with secrets that were eating all of us alive. I didn't know about your secrets, Susan said. I was living just fine without them, but Michael wasn't, I said. Were you? Michael was quiet for a long moment. No, he said finally. I wasn't. I've carried the guilt and regret about David for 34 years. I've wondered every day what he was like, whether he was happy, whether he needed anything I could provide. I've lived with the knowledge that I had a son I'd never be allowed to know. And now I want the chance to know him. I want him to know Emma and Jake. I want us to figure out how to be a family, even if it's not a traditional one. Susan sat back down on the couch, looking suddenly exhausted. This is a lot to process. I know, I said, and I don't expect you to process it all today. But I hope you'll give us a chance. I hope you'll let me get to know Emma and Jake, and let them get to know me. They're going to have questions. Lots of questions. Then we'll answer them. Honestly this time. And your marriage? Rebecca asked. How do we move forward from here? Susan looked at Michael. I don't know. This changes things, Michael. The fact that you kept this secret for 16 years. I don't know how to trust you after this. I understand, he said, and I'll do whatever it takes to rebuild their trust. But Susan, I need you to understand that I kept this secret to protect everyone, David, Eleanor, Rebecca, you, the kids. I thought it was the right thing to do. Maybe it was the right thing to do 34 years ago, she said. But it stopped being the right thing to do when you married me. When we had children together. When we became a family. I could hear Emma and Jake on the stairs, probably listening to every word. This wasn't how I'd imagined this conversation going. But then again, I wasn't sure what I'd expected. Can I make a suggestion? I said. What if we call Emma and Jake back down and explain this to them together? What if we answer their questions as a family? All of us, instead of forcing you and Michael to figure this out alone. Susan considered this. You think they're ready for that level of honesty? I think they deserve it. And I think they're stronger than we're giving them credit for. Michael nodded. Emma's already figured out most of it anyway. She's too smart not to have connected the dots. All right, Susan said. Let's call them down. Let's see if we can make sense of this mess together. Emma and Jake returned to the living room with the cautious excitement of kids who knew something important was happening, but weren't sure if it was good or bad. They settled on the floor again, but this time they were clearly focused on the adults rather than their homework. Okay, Susan said. Your father has some explaining to do, and we're all going to do this together. You can ask any questions you want, and we'll answer them honestly. All right. Emma nodded. Jake looked skeptical but interested. Michael took a deep breath. Before I married your mother, I was married to Rebecca. During that marriage, I made a very big mistake. I had a relationship with another woman, Rebecca's sister Eleanor. That relationship resulted in Eleanor getting pregnant with David. So David is our brother, Emma said matter-of-factly. Half-brother, Michael corrected. You share the same father but different mothers. And you never told us about him because, Jake asked. Because it was complicated. Eleanor was married to someone else. And when David was born, she wanted to keep the truth secret. She wanted David to grow up thinking his mother's husband was his father. That seems like lying, Emma observed. It was lying, Rebecca said. But sometimes adults lie because they think it will protect the people they love. Did it protect David? Jake asked. I considered the question carefully. In some ways, yes. I grew up with a mother who loved me completely, and I never had to deal with the complications of having parents who lived in different states, or the shame of being the result of an affair. But I also grew up not knowing my real father, and not knowing my Aunt Rebecca, who sacrificed a lot to keep the secret. What did she sacrifice? Emma asked. Her relationship with me, I said. She could have been my aunt, the person who spoiled me and told me stories and taught me things my mother couldn't. Instead, she had to watch me grow up from a distance, pretending not to care too much. Emma looked at Rebecca with new interest. That must have been really hard. It was, Rebecca admitted, but I thought it was necessary. I thought protecting David was more important than having a relationship with him. And now, Jake asked. Now we're trying to figure out how to be a family, I said. All of us together. Even though it's complicated and messy, and we're probably going to make mistakes. Susan had been listening quietly, but now she spoke up. Kids, how do you feel about this? About having a half-brother you never knew existed? Emma and Jake looked at each other, silently deciding who would speak. First, it was Emma who broke the silence. It's weird, she said, but also kind of cool. I mean, most people never find out something like this. It feels like a movie. Jake nodded slowly. I think I'm mad that you never told us, Dad. But I'm not mad at David. He didn't do anything wrong. Thank you. I murmured, feeling something tight in my chest begin to ease. You're our brother, right? That doesn't change, Emma added. And, if you want, we can try to get to know you. Michael looked at his kids, then at Susan, eyes shining. You're more generous than I deserve. Susan took a deep breath. Here's what I suggest. Tonight, we have dinner. No drama, no guilt. Just dinner, as a family. After that, we'll take it one step at a time, Rebecca smiled. I'll cook. Jake laughed. If it's as dramatic as your entrance earlier, it'll be a feast. That night, we ate spaghetti and garlic bread. The table was filled with cautious laughter, tentative questions, meaningful silences. It was awkward. It was beautiful. And more than anything, it was real. 2 weeks passed after that night. Michael and Susan started couples counseling. Emma sent me memes and questions about college. Jake asked if I played video games. Rebecca signed a lease on a small house across town. And me, I was learning how to breathe again. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, I opened the last of Mom's boxes. At the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, was an old picture frame. Inside was a faded photograph of me as a baby in Rebecca's arms. She was looking down at me with a love so fierce it almost stopped time. On the back of the frame, in my mother's handwriting, was a note for when forgiveness becomes possible. E. That night, I brought the photo to Rebecca's new house. She was in the garden, tending to the plants the way MOM used to. I found this, I said, handing her the frame. Rebecca looked at the photo and didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was barely a whisper. I didn't even remember this photo existed. Maybe you should keep it, I offered. She shook her head. No, this belongs to both of us. We'll hang it in your house, with the others. It's part of the story now. Are you sure? I'm sure, and so we did. In the living room, next to the pictures of me and MOM at every age, there is now one more photo, an old image, finally bathed in truth. It doesn't erase the pain. It doesn't rewrite the past, but it gives us something we never had before. A beginning.